Hi everyone, it's Nicole here today with a My Favorite Things guest designer post featuring some products from the brand new January release countdown. And today my card features several stamp sets, and the first one I'm using is the Birdie Brown You Have My Heart stamp set. I've stamped a couple of the images on some smooth white cardstock and I'm coloring them in with Copic markers. I've done a little bit of the skin here, and now I'm adding in the hair, and I wanted her to have black hair. And to achieve black hair, one of the best ways to do that is to layer grays until you achieve the desired color. If you went in with black, it would seem very flat and not very realistic. So I always like to build mine up with several shades of gray. I'm using the cool grays here, but any of the other grays would work as well, depending on what kind of undertone, whether you want the cool grays or warm grays or the toner grays. So next I'm going to color in her little dress, and I am doing the main portion of her dress in a light pink. And I'm using about 3 shades to color it in. And the best thing about Copic markers is that you can go over and over the image without pilling the paper and ruining your image to achieve the desired darkness and shading and all of that. So one thing I like to keep in mind when using pinks or reds especially is that when you layer on the color, they tend to want to bleed if you keep layering on the color and layering on the color and not giving the image a little chance to dry, the alcohol ink in the markers to dry in between. So I usually like to lay down the color, maybe even all 3 of my first colors, and then let it dry a little bit while it's after I've blended it the first time, and move to another piece of the design. And once it's kind of dry, I usually go back over it if it's not exactly the way I want it to look. Now I thought I would do her outfit in pinks and blues, and although I like that color combination, it just wasn't working for this project. It wasn't looking like I wanted it to in my mind. So instead of having my project ruined, I decided to go ahead and color over her shirt with some reds. I just chose a little bit darker red colors, and the blue undertones underneath actually added some really nice shading, and I didn't have to do a whole lot of blending and things like that. And I don't think you would ever know unless I, had left that part in, that is what happened there. So don't be afraid to maybe do that. Take a darker color and cover up something that didn't turn out exactly the way you wanted it to. Now I'm adding some texture to her dress by adding little dots. This is one of my very favorite techniques, and I actually took the dots in all 3 tones and kind of colored over each area, the darkest, the mid-tone, and the lightest with those dots to add texture. And finally, I'm adding color to the little dog very quickly. I laid down a base coat color, then added a darker shading color, went back with my lighter color to blend that out. And then I am going to add some little dots to him as well, mostly just in those darker areas. And then I'll go in with my lighter brown color and blend out those just a tiny little bit, but I don't want to blend them too much. I think it adds some nice texture to the dog. Then I colored in his nose black and his collar red. Now, a mistake I made, and I've made this before with My Favorite Things dies, is I stamped the image and colored it in instead of die cutting the image, because these are solid dies, and then stamping and coloring them. To get around this and not have my project ruined, I like to die cut the image out of a scrap piece of paper and cut a little slit in it, line up that die cut around my colored in image, then replace my die in that die cut area, and then carefully remove that kind of scrap piece of paper, and then I can tape my die in place and run it through the machine. Now this is a 4-inch or just slightly less than 4-inch square that I'm using some of the dies from the brand new My Favorite Things Dynamics Love Centerpieces die collection. There's some heart borders and then these XOXO borders. And I'm using the XOXO borders to die cut the entire piece. I'm going to be creating an inlay background. So I need to keep all of these red pieces because I need those little red centers for my design to fill in that negative area. Then I'm die cutting the same design from the Pink Lemonade cardstock and the whipped cream cardstock. And that is so I have some contrasting colors to replace in that square design. And it's going to create a flat design with a really fun die cut background. It was a ton of work. It was one of those projects that I love how it turned out, and when I was thinking about it in my mind, I was like, this is going to be great, but it was very time consuming. So you might want to pop in a movie or your favorite TV show while you're gluing all of those in place. Now, while I have my die cutting machine out, I did die cut one of the brand new Pierced Heart Stacks dies from some vellum. And then I'm also using the Dynamics square frames, the largest frame, and die cutting that from some Grout Gray cardstock. I cut that 3 times to create a nice dimensional frame, which you'll see here in a little bit. I'm applying a little liquid adhesive on the back of my die cut background, and I'm going to place this right on my card base, which is created from the My Favorite Things whipped cream cardstock. It's a 4 1/4 inch square card base. And glue that down. Now, it would be awesome just as is. You would not have to do the inlay technique, and it definitely would make the project go much, much quicker. However, I really wanted to have the pink and cream colored XOXO in the red background. So I'm using my glue pen and replacing all of these little pieces in the die cut areas, even the little red portion there. And that really makes these pop, I think. So like I said, I just turned on my favorite TV or a TV show and got to work and just sat and glued these until I had it all done. So once I have that all finished, I can go ahead and work on putting the rest of the card together. I'm going to glue my square frames one on top of another just to give my frame a little bit of dimension. This card has a lot going on, but it's not very dimensional. And to give some of that, excuse me, dimension, I'm going to glue these one on top of another to kind of have that chipboard type look, nice dimensional frame to frame up the whole design. I'm using a nice strong adhesive to glue all those together, and then I can place that right over my background and frame up the fun design. Now, one fun tip, when I use a liquid adhesive like the Zig glue pen, sometimes it leaves a little residue. Once it's dry, you can take an eraser and erase that off your design, and you won't have any of that gross residue on the front of your project. So that's one thing I like to do when I'm creating a project like this where I've had to use a lot of the liquid glue pen. I don't know if it will work with other liquid glues, but with the Zig glue pen, I noticed when it's dry, you can erase it off and have a nice clean front to your project. Now I've glued the vellum heart in place there, placed my die cut and stamped and colored images there on the frame like you can see, and put my frame in place, or adhered my frame in place. Then I cut apart one of the greetings from that Birdie Brown You Have My Heart stamp set so that I could line up my greeting perfectly. I could have masked it off. In fact, I did try, but I just couldn't get it lined up. So I cut it apart because that's so much easier. And I'm stamping all of the words with Versamark ink, and then sprinkling on some black embossing powder, and then heat setting that to finish off my card design. I hope you've enjoyed this video showcasing several new stamps and dies from the My Favorite Things January release countdown. The supplies I've used are listed and linked below the video on YouTube. Please remember that the new My Favorite Things products will be available for purchase from My Favorite Things on January 6th and from retailers soon thereafter. Thanks for watching!